Okay, so we are now up to Roman numeral four, letter K, tithing and other mitzvot connected to Israeli produce, or the way this is called in the halachic literature, in the rabbinic literature. There's a mitzvot hatuliyot ba'aretz, the mitzvot that depend on the land, on Eretz Yisrael, and the land of Israel. These are, and principal among them is the obligation to tithe, and that's really a difference between fruits and vegetables here and fruits and vegetables that grow in the land of Israel, um, and in a way that is really significant and worth knowing about. And it's something that if you could even, because it's only practiced in Israel and because in the state of Israel, this is all done today at the wholesale level, you could keep kosher your entire life and not really know how to do this. Like I don't really know how to do this, but I will we'll work on we'll talk through it. Okay. Uh, in the times in ancient times, time of the temple, tithing was the way in which the Kohanim and the Leviim would support themselves. Kohanim, the priests, and the Levites who served in the temple they weren't given a portion of the land of Israel to farm. They were instead working in the temple, and so they were supported by tithes, some sort of taxation system that were given by everyone else. Um, and So you would get tithe would be given um, to the there's like several whole system. There's Trumot and Maaser Sheni. It's like a whole system. So Trumot is the first thing you take. That's tithe. Oh, tithe. I think you're saying a translation of
This concept.
it's
Taxation.
my no Maaser. The Maaser Sheni means second Maaser. Okay, but there actually is first Maaser and there's Truma. Okay, there's the Truma, Maaser Sheni, and Maaser Ani. There are at least four different mitzvot in the Trumot and Maasrot system. And so the way it works, so Truma, it goes to the Kohen. You would give a portion to the Kohen. There's no fixed amount, so just some decent amount is given to the Kohen. In the absence, so that was done at the times of the temple. Truma is food that has a sacred status. It can only be eaten by a Kohen who is in a state of purity. So if you were in a Kohen family and you were ritually pure, you had maintained a state of purity, you could eat Truma. And if you were not, you would eat regular food. So if you had a Cohen family, everyone had to keep, share with each other all of their, various bodily processes and things that they may have stepped upon and whatever, sat underneath, that would make them tameh, make them ritually impure because then you couldn't eat truma. So you come home to dinner and you're like, oh, mom, sorry, I can't eat dinner. I can't eat truma tonight. I have to, it's like a very, very complicated, very hot, very complicated system. But Kohanim could eat this food. Other people can't. If you were married into a Kohen family, she can eat truma while she's married. Okay. Um, then there's Maaser. Maaser is given to the Levites, and that's done every year on the produce that grows. There's also um, a 7-year cycle, which I'm gonna just pull up to remind myself of what the 7-year cycle is. Um, nope, nope, haven't gone there yet. We'll get there. You gotta get a lot of. It's good. Actually, you have a lot of websites how to take. That's great. One second. Okay, here we go. So years one, two, four, and five of the cycle, you separate Maaser Sheni. You separate Truma for the Kohen. You separate Maaser Rishon. The first Maaser goes to the Levite. Then a second Maaser is taken, Maaser Sheni, which is taken by the farmer to Jerusalem and eaten there, or transferred, the sanctity is transferred onto money, which is then brought to Jerusalem and used to buy food and eaten in Jerusalem. That's your Maaser Sheni. Um, in years 3 and 6 is Maaser Ani, that is tithe that goes to the poor. And then in year 7 is the Shemitah year, the sabbatic year, and there is no standard tithing um, because it's not yours. You're just sort of the land is sort of lying fallow. Exactly. And tithing year for fruits is it year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the cycle depends on Tu B'Shvat. If fruit grows after Tu B'Shvat, it's the next year in the cycle. Before Tu B'Shvat, the 15th of Shvat, it's before in the cycle. And for vegetables is Rosh Hashanah. like our Rosh Hashanah is when if it took root before Rosh Hashanah, it's the year before. If it took root after Rosh Hashanah, it's the following year. So that's Truma and Maaseh. Today, without Kohanim who can eat Truma without, what do we do? So um, if you if it's produce in America, you don't have to worry about it because Truma and Maaseh are not relevant outside of Israel. If you're in Israel and you're buying from a supermarket, you make sure from a kosher supermarket, you find that every supermarket should have a kashrut certificate displayed, which shows that the produce was from wholesalers where this was done. If you go to visit your cousin, Dudu on his kibbutz, and he gives you a crate of grapefruits, you have to separate true and maser yourself before you can eat it. Okay, so how do you do that? So all sorts of websites how to do that. Okay, so you. Oh, and why? And the other place which would happen sometimes Israeli produce you find in America was you don't it's hard like the produce that's sold for domestic consumption in Israel, Shuman and Maaseh are taken. The produce that they export, it's not necessarily the case. Um, and so if you have Israeli produce in America, you have to switch. There's like 2 weeks a year when like peppers in America are from Israel and like oranges like 1 week a year, the oranges in America. So if you find you have to take Truma and Maaseh. So here's how you do it. You take all the produce in front of you. You remove slightly more than 1% of the produce. Um, and um, that's your truma. Then you take a coin, which is valid on the current street in which where you're doing this is designated for pidyon, for redemption. Has so a nickel is sufficient. Okay. No blessings recited because we don't really know that maybe this was done already in Israel before export. But if you do it at your cousin's moshav, your cousin's kibbutz, then you do have to say the bracha, which is in a siddur. And then you, um, here's what you say the following. You say the amount in the northernmost part of the separated portion, which is greater than 1% of the total amount of the produce, shall be my truma gedola. That's my portion of the kohanim. The remaining part of the separated portion, plus an additional 9% on the northernmost side of the produce, or the right-hand side, whatever you want. That's my Meiser Rishon. That's my first tithe. The part of the separated portion that was previously designated Meiser Rishon shall be Trumat Maaser, because the Levites also have to give Truma on their portion as well. That's called the Truma of the Maaser. 10% of the remaining produce in the southern side shall be Meiser Sheni or Meiser Oni in accordance with the year of the Shemitah cycle during which the 1, 2, 3, right? That cycle. If the 10% of the southern side is Meiser Sheni, I want to redeem it because, how sure am I at which year of the Shemitah cycle we are? No one really knows. So I should redeem it by transferring its Kedusha on this coin, calculated at its value plus 25% to the coin. What's the value of food that can't be eaten? Because nobody is pure and can't, it's very little, so a nickel. Okay, so now the nickel is sanctified instead of the food. Um, and um, there's actually a little version. You can say all separate. You can say all separations of Truma and Meiser and redemptions of Meiser Sheni and Netzrevai shall be effected in accordance with the text of the Chazon Ish. You just say that, and then it works. Then the nickel. Okay, so the separated portion that was more than 1%. That's wrapped up and discarded because it's the Truma, it's the Meiser. It's only be eaten by a pure Kohen. There is no pure Kohen, so just discard it. And the redemption on the coin then has to be destroyed, right? Because that coin can only be brought to um, let's say that. Let's see. Yeah, I think the coin you have to destroy. I think you have to be careful with that coin because that coin can only be used for these purposes. You can't just let it lie around. Just like drill a hole in it or something, or throw it into the ocean or something like that. Okay, I can you can find more or less complicated versions of this. This would be what you would do if for Israeli produce sold in American supermarkets, because unless you can ascertain that Truma and Meiser were separated already before export, or if you're in Israel and somebody gives you get fruits and vegetables that not from a store where this was done already. So You don't have to do that. Like you can live your life very happy without doing this, but it might happen. Okay.
Yeah.
This it sounds very complicated because it's like a whole various stage that we're sort of all kind of combining into one rather than doing it. It would be much more simple. You just take your truma and you give it to the Kohen, and then you take your meiser and you give it to. But we're trying to do it as simply as possible with preserving as much food as possible since we can't actually do the mitzvah in its full way. So that's why the system becomes a little bit sort of more complex. I'll share on the chat the the text I was just reading from. Yeah, John, go ahead.
I have two questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is this the same concept for grain as well?
For what?
Grains?
Grains, you do this stuff. You get like, I don't know. Yeah, there's very little. It's just not, there wouldn't be as, like, what's the circumstance in which you would acquire grains that are grown in Israel, in America, or in Israel, not from a store, right?
Yeah.
This is very unlikely.
Okay. And then second question, how do you know if the produce you're buying, like fruits, have been, like you have to wait 3 years to.
Oh, Orla, yeah. So you assume it's not. Orla is like 3 years. Fruit, candy fruit for the first 3 years. That you assume that it's not. Like the vast majority is not, and you can assume that it's not. Yeah. I mean, in Israel, you have to verify, but that would be included in this, like the supervision of the fruits and vegetables, the wholesale level would verify that. And in America, you can assume it's not unless yeah. Good question. Yeah.
So this system, or this sort of ritual you described
Yeah.
here, it only involves a total of 1% of the produce?
Yeah, because because the maaser that you're taking, you're allowed, and once you have to separate it, but you're allowed to eat it. And the maaser sheni that you're supposed to eat in Jerusalem, you've redeemed it onto the coin. So now you can eat it afterwards. So you're separating more, but then you're not, you have to designate it, but you're allowed to eat it. It's only the truma that can only be eaten by a Kohen. So that's your 1%. And
Okay,
yeah.
and it's 1% to the Cohen, and then it's 10% for each maser?
Maaser, the first maaser is 10%. I don't think, yeah, it's exactly 10% then 10% is the Maaser Rishon, the first 10, and then the second 10%, yeah, is either Maaser Sheni or the Maaser Ani for the poor or for yourself in Jerusalem. But that you can eat. You have to separate it, but you can eat it. So, yeah. Yeah.
So if you're if I were in Israel and say my family was Kohanim and I went to a kosher supermarket to buy the food, is there any, in terms of getting it, would I be given some of this food that's been, set aside? Would I?
This ceremony is done at a mass scale at the wholesale level. So they do so they discard a little bit and the rest they say, and then yeah.
Just shop as normal.
Exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
you would never be aware of this at yeah.
But you said there are no Kohanim anymore, even if you're.
There are no Kohanim who are pure, who are ritual pure, because even a Kohen can't eat truma unless he's pure. And why can't he can't be pure? Because we don't have the ashes of the red heifer right. If you come right there, a mikvah, solves certain washing hands solves certain types of impurity, and going to a mikvah solves other types of impurity. But if you've been come into contact with a corpse or someone who has, or been in a building with a corpse, the only way to become purified is the ceremony described in the book of Numbers of the washing in the waters with the ashes of the red heifer. We haven't had a red heifer in 2,000 years, so everybody is in a state of impurity. So that's why we don't, yeah. So. Okay, that's a lot. There's a teacher, Rav Rimon, who describes going on vacation to the United States or on a work trip to the United States, and he was hungry. He went to buy an apple, and he starts thinking, "Oh, can I eat this apple? What are all the mitzvot that are pertain to?" And then he realized, "Oh, I'm in America. Like, there's no mitzvot, and no truma, no meiser, no. You don't have to worry about, And he's like, I'm not really hungry anymore. It's sort of happened. Like, there's no. So something very special about the ability to do these mitzvot. It's a great, very special thing. And so this is how actually, this is the um, there's no such thing as inherent sanctity in Judaism. Nothing is holy. Nothing's intrinsic, inherent holiness. Things are only holy because of sort of human action and dedication. And holiness always has to have definitions and has to have implications. So the holiness of the land of Israel is the places where that was settled by the Jews who came back in the time of Ezra from Babylonian exile and settled with permission of the king and endow that land with eternal sanctity, and the sanctity is manifest in these mitzvot that are only done in those parts of the world. And so that's I don't know, I think a very so a special thing to experience, even if it's a little, even we can't really experience fully today. So, um, questions, comments? Okay. Um, yeah, I would say you don't have to like, you don't have to like memorize this, procedure, but like if it comes relevant, you'll look it up and you'll learn how to, okay. Um, um,
Oh, Orla was coming up.
yeah.
No.
Okay, other produce issues. Insects. We don't need insects. We talk about that? I don't know. We don't.
You've mentioned it a couple times, sprinkled.
Okay. We don't need insects, except for certain types of locusts, which most Jewish communities, and the Torah explicitly says you can eat certain types of grasshoppers and locusts. Most Jewish communities lost the tradition of how to identify the kosher from the non-kosher species of insects, except for some of the Yemenites preserve this, some of the Moroccans preserve these traditions, and they continue to eat these locusts. And today you can buy certified kosher locusts that were, which anyone can eat. I have not tried it. It's the protein of the future.
No,
Potato.
not happening. No.
Okay, just saying. Okay,
Insect
Like imagine
based.
getting like a leg stuck.
okay,
No.
all right. It's kosher. It's saying. Okay.
No.
But other insects are not, and so you have to make sure to remove them from your food. Why can't it just be nullified in 60? And any insect is far less than 60 times the volume of the romaine leaf that it might be walking upon? The answer is it's a Birya Shlema. It's an entire intact organism, and an intact organism is not nullified. So if it's so it has to be washed away and removed. If it's an intact organism, if you chop up put your basil leaves in make some pesto and you put it in the blender, so it's no longer an intact organism. Or if you take your spinach and you freeze it, then it's no longer an intact organism, okay? And then you don't have to worry about it anymore. But if it's a salad or something, whatever, like where the organism is intact, then it has to be removed. You can't rely on nullification in 60 times its volume, and so you should wash your vegetables carefully. One method is to soak them in water with a little bit of vinegar. Some people use a little bit of soap to kind of loosen their grip on the leaf, and then rinse it really, really well. And that usually works. Some people go use special insect inspection lights to check their lettuces. That is not what I do. I just wash. I soak in water with a little vinegar. I rinse really well. I make sure that I don't see bugs floating in the water. If I do, I do it again. And yeah, that's what I do. But I think this would be, in terms of different Orthodox communities, some are quite strict in their bug removal. So I'm just sharing what I do, but you might see other people who do much more. And sort of a piece that sort of, in microscopic organisms do not count. Okay. So it's only a kosher concern if it's visible with the naked eye. So the question is like what does that mean? Yeah, if you're trained to notice that like that tiny little speck is actually an insect, but if you wouldn't know that if you weren't trained to notice it. Does that count as visible with the naked eye or not? So I don't know. Like that's one area of kind of some people are very strict. That's why they say no, this is totally visible with the naked eye. You just have to be trained to look for them. And you have to shine a light on it. You take a big light and you put a leaf on it, and you don't need you don't need a magnifying lens, you don't need a microscope. You can see perfectly well with your own eye. You take a special microfiber of cloth and you wipe it out. You can see them right there. Or maybe no, like a normal person looking at it, even very carefully, sees that there are no insects. Like that's sufficient. So I think those are some of the differences. But I'd say the kosher restaurants with strict supervision. This is one of the areas in which they're quite strict about, and they would make sure that there's a trained professional washing vegetables and checking for insects. So again,
Rabbi Wolkenfeld?
yes, hello.
What you just said about spinach, does
Yeah.
that mean that a package of frozen chopped spinach is okay without a hefsher?
I think so because if it's just the only ingredient is, I mean, you have to. I wouldn't be concerned. I wouldn't worry about bugs. I don't think I don't think insects is a reason. Anything that is frozen or chopped, I think the insects is not going to be a problem because anything that desiccates or chops at the insects means that they're no longer Birya Shlema, and so it would be nullified in 60 times its volume. Now, you might say you're not allowed to intentionally nullify something in 60 times its volume, so you can't. So maybe that's a problem. But I think no. I think if it's the method of if it's the you're not chopping up the spinach or freezing the spinach to desiccate and destroy the insects. You're doing it because that's the recipe you're following, or that's the preservation
Because
method you're
it
using.
comes frozen in a block like that.
Yeah, precisely. And the reason why they froze it is not to sell insects to Jews. That's did it to,
Right.
right? Um, there's a yeah, there's a concern because if they were to get a hechsher, maybe like I think that kashrut agencies won't give a hechsher to anything that relies upon bittul, even though it's a perfectly valid kashrut principle that we use all the time in our homes. The kashrut agency, because I think they feel that if they're giving a hechsher, then the fact that there's bittul happening means it's intentional nullification, right? You can't put less than 60 times non-kosher in a mixture in order to nullify it. That you can't do. But if it like happens in a normal way, then that's fine. So if they're giving extra to a product that relies on bitzel, maybe that, so I had a famous story of it. There was a milk company that had some sort of vitamin D additive that was derived from like shark oil or something. So it was a non-kosher ingredient they put into the milk, far, far less than 160 times its volume. No intention whatsoever to sell this to the Jewish community. They weren't like nullifying the shark oil, and the proof that they weren't intentionally selling to the Jewish community, they lost their hechsher because of this. And so my teacher, Rabbi Clapper, said it's kosher because they lost their hechsher. The fact that they lost their hechsher proves that they weren't intentionally trying to sell to the Jewish community, and so that's less than 60 times its volume. They weren't intentionally trying to pull a fast one and circumvent the system. So he felt it was kosher for that reason. So I think any frozen vegetables, I think the insects is not going. Maybe it'll be a problem of if it's cooked, if it's prepared, processed at the same factory where they also process whatever. That might be a concern. I think with frozen spinach is not a concern, but yeah, I think frozen vegetables are not a hechsher vis-a-vis bugs because the freezing process, there's no birya shlema that after it's been frozen and thaws out. I'm glad you picked up on that, Bell. It's good. Okay. Next. So that's insects. Anything about insects? Okay. I saw it. I found a couple of bugs when I was cleaning some romaine lettuce recently. I felt very confirmed in my faith that they exist and that
Virtuous.
yeah, virtuous, yes, but also like it restored my faith in like in our sages that they ordained that we should do this, and like indeed there it was. I found a fly in my romaine lettuce, so it's good. Um, uh, But you might encounter a kosher, an otherwise very fancy kosher restaurant. You may notice that your asparagus comes without the tops because they might have felt that we can't possibly clean the asparagus tops with a sufficient assurance that there are no insects. So we'll shave the asparagus, or you'll find shaved strawberries because you can't possibly. There's so many visible, strawberry mites or whatever. So you can look online. You can see people, do that. Again, I think if you so carefully, you can look at it. I don't know. So, but okay. Orla, first 3 years of a tree. So that's a concern with our trees growing here. We planted in the yard of the shul. Don't eat those apples yet, but you don't have to worry about that in the general marketplace. I guess if you plant a tree, wait 3 years to eat the fruit. Kilayim, mixed species, not something you have to worry about. As a consumer, I think is an issue as a grower, like grafting, which is a common way of propagating fruit trees. Most fruit trees, I think, are grafted, so I think that's a problem as a farmer or grafter, not a problem as a consumer. Also, like planting certain types of like grapes and vegetables too close together is a key line concern. I think not generally, not something to worry about as a consumer. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't understand why it's a problem only for the farmer. If the farmer grafts in a way you're not supposed to and then sells it to you, aren't you somehow violating?
Not necessarily, meaning I think certain it doesn't make the product of this grafted tree is not necessarily non-kosher. Just because someone's doing something wrong doesn't mean the product is always.
Oh,
So yeah. So certain things it's forbidden to do, but the consequences are not for the consumer. So yeah.
and the farmer supposed to throw out the first 3 years of the fruit then?
Yeah.
No, you leave them for the board.
No, 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 no. They can't eat early either. No, no, no,
Oh,
no, no, no. You leave for the poor. You leave when you're harvesting your field, your grain. You leave your corners for the poor, and you leave your leket and shechet. Leket is like the forgotten sheaves as you go through the field you leave behind. You can't go back for them, and the part that drops out of your head you grab, and the part that like remains you also leave for the poor. Yeah, and I don't know what the equivalent of that is in like a farm that's been industrial. Most Jews left the farm a very, very long time, like thousands of years ago. Most Jews have Jews moved to the cities. The overwhelming majority of Jews have lived in cities since the time of the Mishnah. So for like close to 2,000 years, most Jews everywhere on earth have lived in cities and not been farmers. And so like these are all things that we've related to really in like very secondary ways, and we've never gone back. So it's just, so in biblical times, it seems most Jews were farmers, but like really with at some point in the post-biblical period, we don't exactly know when, this like major transformation took place, and so it is what it is. We talked about this in terms of Hilchot Shabbat, right? Because most of the labors that are forbidden on Shabbat are things that most Jews don't do ever. Of the 39 things we can't do on Shabbat, most of us never do them because many of them are agricultural labors at least, and so the things we never really do. Yashan is versus Chadash. Okay, so the Torah says that grain that grows cannot be eaten until the second day of Passover when the Omer sacrifice was brought. That permits the next year, that year's crop of grain. It goes from Chadash to Yashan, from new when you can't eat it to Yashan when you can eat it. And so this is not a concern in Israel because there's very little grain grown there, and they just make sure that to abide by this, they store it until the relevant date. It might be a concern outside of Israel, except that there's a hundreds-year tradition that we're not worried about it outside of Israel because of maybe the mitzvah doesn't apply outside of Israel, and even if it does, we don't really know. Maybe the grain is old grain anyway. It's a bit of a weak argument. Many are. And actually, for many years, it wasn't a problem either in America, at least, because we used to have a grain. Federal government used to buy grain and store it, and then it would be sold after a period of time. And I think Nixon got rid of that system, and I think Soviet sold it to the Russians or something. It was a whole anyway. Right, that the system farm support from Roosevelt, right? The system that Roosevelt set up was that the government would buy grain if prices were too low, and then sell it if prices were too high. And so the government was basically storing lots and lots of grain, and that meant that the grain that you were eating was not new, was not a violation of Chadash. Nixon like privatized the system, sold off the Federal Grain Reserve, and instead instituted a system of price supports, where the government guarantees a minimal price to the farmer and pays the farmers the difference between the market price and the target price, which causes all sorts of, which means that, which had the impact of basically subsidizing industrial food because it means that you can buy grain in America at a very, very low price, at an artificially low price, subsidized by the federal government, and use it as a raw ingredient to make animal feed or to make high fructose corn syrup or to make whatever it is you want to make with it in some industrial, and it means though that the grain that was getting to the market much faster. So there are people who are careful about not eating kadash, and the way they do that is by checking their websites. You look up the barcode of your Cheerios, and it tells you, this is the number of the barcode. Then from this month to this month, you have to worry, and so it's and there are bakeries that will say this is all our breads are yashan, all our breads are old, and they're very careful about this, and it's a very, very admirable thing to be careful about. Not easy, but it's possible. And just from a pure halakha, like just And yet, there's a centuries-old tradition not to be concerned about this outside of Israel, and yet it's based on a relatively weak argument, and it is possible to be strict about it. And so, you can learn and websites to learn how to do. Yes, good.
So when you have the special grain that's kept dry to make matzah for Pesach, um, I thought it was new grain that was brought in.
That
But is it typically
it's the grain that, because in America now that we do two crops, we do a winter crop and right, so it's only one of the crops that is relevant for the grain from matzah. You want it to be make sure it's been kept away from water and not like that's so that, but doesn't, but it could be as old as you want, just has to be kept away from water before you make them out into matzah. The grain that's a problem for Kaddish is grain that was already. I'm just gonna. I don't want to say something wrong about. Um, let's see. Let me just get the. No. If it takes root, right? It's the spring crop is the problem. If it takes root after the 16th of Nisan, so if any grain that's in existence, either growing on the stalk or in your pantry on the 16th of Nisan, when the Korban HaOmer was brought, becomes permissible, goes from Chadesh to Yashan. Any grain that gets planted after the 16th of Nisan, it never existed in the world, not on the plant, not in your pantry, that becomes a problem. You have to wait until so it grows during late spring. It goes in the summer. Um, Spring wheat, oats, barley, planted after Pesach, harvested by summer's end. That crop can't be eaten until the following Pesach.
Okay, so if you were
Whereas,
making your own matzah, you would have to make sure that you had.
and it'll say if you look at on your box of matzah, it probably says yashan. It says it'll say meaning it's not with this, not a concern here. Yeah. But the second day of Pesach would be fine, right? So it's only be fine with the second Seder.
But I guess if you grow your own wheat to make your own matzah, you can't, and grow it that year, you can't really use that on the first night of Pesach.
Correct. Right. Spring wheat is planted around or just after Passover and harvested through late summer. Spring wheat is the main Kaddish concern as it's planted after the 16th of Nisan. Barley and oats, typically spring crops planted after Passover, making them almost always considered new grain until the next year. So like certain months of the year, you can't eat your Cheerios, but keep them in your pantry until, okay. Winter grain, winter wheat, rye, and spelt are usually planted in late autumn and take root before Passover, making them yashan, old grain, and generally permitted. In Israel, grains are usually sown in the winter, take root before Pesach, and Kaddish is much less common in all the grain grown in Israel, which is not very much. And the stuff they import gets quarantined until it's not a problem anymore either. So if you're in Israel, it's very unlikely to be a problem. I would say if you're living in Israel for a year, for 2 years, you may as well be strict about it and not eat your imported Cheerios until, you know what I mean? Like just to be.
And to be clear, is this
Yes.
between Rosh Hashanah and the first day of Pesach? Like when does it?
No. From the life cycle of the wheat.
Okay.
So if the grain takes root in the ground after the 16th of Nisan, then you have to wait a full year before you eat it. Yeah. Good question. Okay.
But the winter wheat which takes root beforehand, does any of that ever get harvested in time to make matzah?
Right, sure. Yeah. I think it would. Yeah, exactly.
Do that.
Yeah, totally. I would imagine so. Or it's using grain that's a year old, but either way, yeah. Okay. Okay, challah. Another one of the gifts to the Kohanim, to the priest, that was a portion of every dough that is needed. And there's a certain quantity of flour that, when made into dough, obligates one to separate challah to give it to a Kohen. As a bracha you say when you separate. If you use less wheat in your dough, you separate anyway, but you don't say the bracha. My wife bakes challah almost every week. She bakes bread almost every week. She generally does not say the bracha because her recipe, the quantity she makes in a week is just not enough to warrant the bracha, but different people, different recipes. some people actually give the challah to a kohen. There are positions that even today a kohen can eat challah. More typically, it is not given to a kohen. Instead, it is burned or destroyed. So you takes a little lump of dough, puts it off to the side, wraps aluminum foil, goes into the oven with everything else, gets burned to a crisp and discarded. Um, that's like the more common. But I just actually had dinner with kohanim on Friday night, and they were telling me that they sometimes like there were some communities where this is some halachic positions that today kohanim also can receive challah, and so. It happens.
So challah that you buy in the store. Yeah.
So the word. So this is good. The word challah means to like the actual technical definition of challah is the portion of every dough that you make, which is not eaten by the householder, but was given to a kohen or discarded more commonly. That is what challah means that's the technical halachic definition of challah. That name somehow, colloquially, casually, came to be used to describe a typical Shabbos bread. But you actually could use anything. Any loaf of bread is fine for your Sabbath meal, and technically, challah means the portion of the bread that you don't eat that gets given to the kohen. So that's the way I'm using it now. Any certified kosher bread, challah was taken from it and discarded or given to a kohen. And sometimes it'll say on the packaging, challah was taken.
Even like sandwich bread.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sandwich bread, it's a good question. If it's like the sliced bread, if it's made in a factory, there's no Jewish owner, there's no Jewish baker. It's unclear who would be. I don't actually. It's a good question. I'm not sure. Possibly not.
But it's kosher.
Meaning,
It doesn't necessarily mean that.
Like it just has a hex.
I'm telling you, like kosher sandwich bread that's like made in a factory with not untouched by human hands. I'm not sure there's an obligation to separate challah because there is no Jewish owner. But any bread baked by a Jew, there's an obligation to separate challah, and so it'll say that on your box of matzah, it might say challah was taken. But and it was definitely done. If you go to a kosher pizza shop, they took challah on the dough that they used from it.
This is performed before it's baked.
Correct.
But when after you can't do it.
It's a good question. If you forget to do it, can you do it afterwards? I don't remember. Maybe, but you're supposed to do it before. Okay. Number 6, Shemitah, the sabbatical year. Okay. Huge. Okay. In Israel, every 7th year, the land is supposed to lie fallow. You're not supposed to do many agricultural labors. The food that does grow on its own has special sanctity. You have to treat it in a special way. You have to, you can't destroy it. You can't treat it disrespectfully. You can't throw it out. You have to wait for it rots before you throw it out. There are restrictions on how it's bought and sold and trafficked. A few, 150 years ago or so, there's struggling agricultural communities in the land of Israel, the first Jewish farmers in thousands of years. They decided to sell the farm to a non-Jew for the year so that they could continue to be farmed during the Shemitah year and so that the farm could survive. This is still necessary for agriculture because even though agriculture is a very small percentage of Israel's GDP, you can't sustain. If you can't sell one year, you won't have your customers the next year because Israeli agriculture is a high-tech agriculture that sells on a global market, and there is it's like a 2-week period where peppers from Israel are the freshest peppers you can get anywhere in Western Europe, and so it's going to be in every supermarket in Western Europe for 2 weeks, and that's it. And if you're not in the market one year, they'll find some other supplier and you're done. Okay. Like it's a very competitive global market now. And so this heter mechira, this permission granted by selling the land to a Gentile is actually still dominant and necessary for Israeli agriculture. There are some farmers though, who actually let their fields rest and lie fallow. There's a beautiful video you can find of kibbutz Shalavim right before the Shemitah year, reverse Shoshana the Shemitah year, kind of dancing as their tractor drives off the field for the year. It's like very sweet. It's kind of really beautiful. Laws of Shemitah are fairly complicated. It's once every 7 years, really only relevant in Israel. I would just say we have a couple of years until the next one. When it comes around, if you find yourself in Israel, buy yourself a good book. I helped edit. It's a great book about Shemitah that I helped edit the English translation of. So it exists. I would say go read it, and I'm not going to spend more time, I think, on it now because it's quite complicated and really it's a once every 7 years. So every 7 years, everyone has to like relearn the halachot and the laws and how to do it and what to buy and where. And it's very exciting if you're in Israel that year, but sadly, nothing really participated in outside of Israel so much. So I think we won't go into it more, but it's a beautiful and vast field of halakha. And I think we'll pause now because I have a meeting at 9 o'clock. Do you have any final questions before we turn off the
It sounds like you're saying.
selling? Yeah. So look, there are people who don't like to rely on, but you know what? Truth is, everyone's relying on some loophole or another because there's so many leniencies. Like it's this, or either you're lenient on selling or you're lenient on the purchasing and the trafficking and the selling and how you're feeding people. And so there's really it's very hard to avoid some loophole or another in the Shemitah year. But you're right; it is a gap between the Torah's vision of farmers having a year of rest to study and rejuvenate, and this sort of radical equality of everyone, all the land is ownerless, and people just walking into fields and picking fruit. It's that vision, and what we have today is it's a shadow of that. So you're absolutely right, and it's a tragic shadow of that. But we have to survive, and these are well founded on halachic. Strong halachic arguments, and I would encourage you to read, some of these Shemitah books. Rav Rimon's Shemitah book is excellent and I was on the editorial team. I highly recommend it, and I get no royalties, but it goes through all the topics in a very clear way. He's a great halachic writer. All right, we'll pause now. Thank you. All right.